Hello everyone in the XNA class. It's Jason and Logan here. We're about to kick off SpaceFighter. I'd like to go ahead and spend just a moment and talk about this particular video, the SpaceFighter overview video. This is a temp video. After SpaceFighter is wrapped up, Logan and I will come back and revisit the overview video and break down everything that we want to include in this video. SpaceFighter has a lot of different elements that make it up. There's a lot of different things to cover, and I'm sure that everyone that's currently watching this video is really excited about getting into SpaceFighter. Of course, that doesn't mean we're going to shortchange any of the descriptions before we do a coding video. All of those videos will be in place. As a matter of fact, in the very next video, we're going to be recording a project setup. In the video after that, we're going to begin whiteboarding the sprite class, and then we'll start the coding of it. But before we give the giant overview, I want to go ahead and get the game completely finished. And when I say game, Logan, let's spend just a minute and talk about that. We know with the current volume of XNA, the way we have shifted gears is such that we're teaching you guys how to put engines together. And there's not been much for game elements in each of the things we've put together for you guys.
As a matter of fact, as we progressed, the engines have actually gotten lighter and lighter. We're banking on the fact that you can go and leverage all of the principles you've learned up until now, so the things we've been focusing on are just the new things.
Exactly.
A lot of that will carry into SpaceFighter, in that we don't intend on ending with a game that you can go and submit to all of your friends or submit as an actual game, or like a reviewable game. It is primarily an engine that we finish with. Though I would like to point out that it won't be quite as basic as some of the engines we've shown up to this point. It is all one concise system. It will be one project in the end that contains all working pieces put together. That means at the end of it, you will be able to control a ship. You'll be able to have enemies and things on screen.
You'll have up to 4 people can control ships.
Exactly. You'll have multiplayer support as far as co-op is concerned. You'll be able to shoot whatever happens to be on screen. The only piece that's really left out is the taking this kit and making it into a game. That means we're not going to cover level creation or game story or game rules or anything of that nature. We'll show how those can be put into place. As a matter of fact, we'll even show how levels could be organized, but we're going to leave the level, if we're going to call it that, very simple in nature. As a matter of fact, I'll even show how a lot of the level can be assembled randomly.
Yeah, and the nifty thing about doing this is that I'm really excited to see what kinds of space fighters come from our students, because I know we have a few dedicated students out there. As a matter of fact, I know that we've got several students that are working on SpaceFighter and some that have completed versions of SpaceFighters. So after watching all of these videos, hopefully you'll be inspired for some new directions. Logan's put a lot of thought into the logic and how he'd want to set up a top-down scrolling game like this. And hopefully you'll pick up some really cool tricks and some new logical ideas that you can apply to your own versions of SpaceFighter.
Exactly. And we've tried to give a lot of information so you can put a lot of the eye candy elements in. We've got damage effects, damage textures in place. We've got
seeking missiles.
We've got missiles. We've also got explosions. Up until this point in the XNA Xtreme class, nothing has really exploded in the sense that you see anything other than the item in question go away.
Right.
Here we are going to focus on, well, okay, how do we have something take damage and then explode and then go away with the full explosion effect to go along with it?
That's right. Now, Logan, since we're just here, kicked back, chilling, talking with our students, let's go ahead and spend a few minutes and talk about some of the different categories. Now, I'd like to point out this video will be deleted from the FTP box just as soon as we have the grand overview video, which we have no idea how long that video will be when we record it. But let's spend a few seconds, and for those that have not really been keeping up with what's going on with the classroom, or maybe they're not even that familiar with SpaceFighter, because I know for a fact we do have a few students in the XNA class that have simply downloaded stuff and have not watched a single video. And again, I know that through various friends and people that are in the class that are friends of mine that simply haven't had a chance to get to anything. So let's talk about SpaceFighter, just in case they're tuning in right now.
To begin with, we could point out the fact that SpaceFighter is actually a bit of a misnomer. The game is not, in fact, a fighting game. Just get that out of the way right at the beginning.
So, speaking of that, let's go ahead and talk about the game genre.
Well, the game genre is going to be a scrolling shooter.
Okay.
That is in contrast to a game like in Space Invaders or Galaga, where that would be a fixed shooter. You do have a ship, you do have enemies, but you never leave the bounds of one current screen. You don't move up the screen or any other direction. You stay on one screen. A scrolling shooter is a shooter game with similar elements. In this case, you have a ship, you have enemies that are on screen, but you advance further into the level by, well, to put it bluntly, moving up screen.
Yeah.
As you move up the screen, new enemies will appear, new things will appear to give the illusion that you are progressing forward. And that can really entail anything as simple as a star field that scrolls by you, and even range up into entire levels that have geometry off to the sides. Now, again, we're not going to take it to the final element of having collidable levels, but we are going to cover how a level class can be put together to replay an action of spawn events, such that as you advance into the game, new sets, even new patterns of enemies can be spawned.
Exactly. All right, game elements. You'd mentioned a few of these, but the SpaceFighter engine that we're putting together will support up to 4 players.
And I decided on that because the way in which I implemented 2 players originally was based on a loop and the number of elements that can be in the, it's the player or the input. The thing that you use that has 1 through 4 that gives you controls. I'm a bit out on the term of it. Player index, that's it. As I was making 2-player support, I noticed that the way I had done it, if I changed the array from 2 to 4, you automatically had 4-player support. So that's actually where 4 players came about. And since this was more of an engine focus than a game focus, I figured I would leave that open to as many as you would like.
Sure.
Obviously, it'd be easier to say that, you know what, I only want 2 players. It's easier to take 2 down from 4 than to magically make 4 players exist.
Yeah.
So we figured we'd show how to do complete 4-player support, since the XNA framework does in fact support 4 unique players.
Okay. And of course, we'll also have enemies.
And enemies, the idea with enemy is basically an object on screen that is bad for you. Not even necessarily one that attacks you actively, just an enemy, a thing on screen that you should not collide with.
Such as an asteroid.
So an asteroid in this case would be considered an enemy. However, the concept is going to be further to a point of where you have actual aggressive enemies, ones which will fire back at you.
Okay. Projectiles.
Well, that's going from the fact that, well, we know that we're going to have to be able to shoot. That goes along with this kind of genre. You control a ship or something similar, and you shoot at enemies. And in some cases, the enemies can shoot back at you. Mm-hmm. And the thing that is used to shoot with are projectiles. In this case, we're always going to have projectile-style weapons. That means in order to shoot something, you'll need to spawn something else.
Right.
You can actually, if you want a visual, think back to cannon. In order to shoot the sphere that appeared on the top of the screen, we used a little diamond projectile. Same concept in SpaceFighter. The difference is we'll be able to have lots of projectiles.
Lots of projectiles.
I'm going to set up, or rather have done a good deal of research into not just the projectile, but the way in which projectiles spawn, such that you can actually have burst fire weapons, and the resulting end effect of that will be patterns that you can fire more than just individual projectiles one at a time. That way you can have full volleys or full waves of projectiles. And whether you decide to have the enemies fire waves or you be able to fire waves at the enemy is up to you. In the end, I'm actually trying to mimic the demo video. If you remember, a long time ago on the XNA registration page, there was a small flash video, or excuse me, a small YouTube video that showed SpaceFighter in action, and that showed a red ship shooting these waves, these volleys of projectiles, and blowing up asteroids with them. And that's what I wanted to reproduce. So we've got a full weapon system that allows you to control timing and pattern generation of projectiles.
I really like the enemy-seeking missiles. Those are my favorite, especially when they start branching off into different directions, because each missile kind of has a mind of its own, and they've set a different target.
And the whole point with the missiles is the projectile that is most commonly used on screen I've simply called Bullet. The funny thing about Bullet is there is nothing unique to it. It is a standard stock projectile with no further behavior. The only thing stored in it is the instructions that are used to make bullets. So at the end of SpaceFighter, I noticed that projectiles had been left pretty simple. They move. Well, they can collide with things, but they basically just move. I wanted a reason to put custom behavior in another kind of projectile, so I opted to make seeking missiles. So you fire a missile, it picks a target, and then it homes in on that target. But the way it does it is it doesn't immediately just point at it. It actually has a limited angle that it can turn per update, which means that if you fire too close to an enemy, it might not be able to turn all the way. It will actually have to circle around the enemy and make a second run. It's
great stuff. All right, layout. Well, hang on. Projectiles, power-ups. I'm jumping ahead.
And with power-ups, this is something that wasn't shown in the original video, but in this type of game, the way you get generally anything, usually upgraded weapons or additional bombs or anything of that nature, is gathered as power-ups, either when you kill an enemy or things that just spawn on screen. Power-ups would let you gain weapons or abilities. In SpaceFighter, since we do have the concept of health for both you and the enemies, it's also used for health power-ups. So as you take damage, you can collect the health power-ups to regain energy.
Which is a really good time to go ahead and point out the graphics that we're going to be using. In the next video, we'll take a look at them, but I do want to make it very clear to everyone that our focus through SpaceFighter is SpaceFighter, getting the engine together with a really good start for a game itself, something that's playable. But we're not spending a lot of time on graphics. That's not the goal here.
As a matter of fact, you'll actually see that the quality of the graphics that we use varies greatly depending on the object in question. Things like the ship, the enemy, and the asteroid have an honest-to-goodness texture and animation that has been put together for them. Other things like sidearm attachments and missiles are a triangle I drew in a sprite creation program. The reason being is that the original graphics came from the presentation that was part of the XNA registration screen. And all of the new graphics for the features that SpaceFighter has magically grown since we decided to make it have been put together on the fly just as we needed them. Again, the focus is the engine, so all of them could be looked at as placeholder graphics. The idea is that once you know how to make all these elements interact, then it's up to you to come up with some good-looking assets to give a unique feel to your game.
Now, layout's already been covered. Basically, we're just dealing with a layout that's going to have us progressing up and enemy objects that will be encountered as the level progresses. And that's pretty much it. So screen area usage was another thing.
This is a little bit interesting. The reason that we're pointing this out as a bullet is because in games up until SpaceFighter, we have always used the entire screen area. We've never come up with a concept of make a viewport that's smaller or restrict the playable area in any way. We've always used the entire game window or the entire screen. With SpaceFighter, I decided to narrow the playing field down, literally. I decided to make the playing field more narrow in width than it is high. The reason for this is since, if let's say, to contrast that, let's say we're playing on a widescreen monitor television, and you were on one corner of the 16:9 screen and you had an enemy on the far other side, unless your ship could move very fast, you wouldn't be able to cross the screen in time to kill them if they were moving down at the same speed that you could move across. So what we do is we restrict the horizontal movement, or horizontal play area. Then you have less room to worry about left and right. You can focus on the longer path being up and down, so you actually see enemies in advance, so you have time to move over to them.
Exactly. And we'll also use this area to put information up and all.
So that, and since that is non-playable screen space,
that's right.
That's a prime candidate to put HUD elements, because now your player can't get there, enemies can't get there, so just draw information about the game. Things like, health, score potentially. We're going to use it to give a debug readout so you can see how many nodes are in your game.
Nodes. That brings us up to the very next topic, game nodes.
All right, game nodes are what I'm going to call the base scene item. In past games, we've always come up with a name for what the items in our scene, the objects in our scene are called. Generally, this has been actor. I've opted to call it node because we're going to implement the idea of a scene graph. Now, not in a complete scene graph. I'll invent a term here and I'll call it a fragmented scene graph. It's actually going to be a hybrid between the old way where we would have a flat list of objects and a graph where things are organized in a hierarchical fashion. As in, if you wish to traverse this graph, you have to be able to move recursively from parent to child, or from parent to children.
Which allows us to do just that, parenting.
And that's the whole point. Putting the system in allows us to parent nodes to other nodes. This allows for abilities such as sidearm attachments or upgrades to your ship.
Or an enemy that has swirling orbs around it that provide extra damage.
Or just an enemy that's made up of multiple individual destroyable components.
Like a big boss, exactly. And having the ability to destroy just part of the ship, yet another part of it can continue fighting. That's cool stuff. So having a scene graph will enable us the foundation for building stuff like that.
Exactly. Now it is, and I'll point out once again that it is still hybrid in nature, meaning that I'm not going to put in a root node, so you can't transverse the scene using a purely recursive method. There's actually still, no matter how deep or how complex the parenting scenario is, there is always going to be a flat list of nodes that you can transverse linearly. And the reason for this is to make it easy to manage things like update calls and draw calls. Where at that level, you're no longer moving things, so you're no longer worried about parenting. You just want to say, give me everything so I can move it the right amount, or give me everything so that I can draw it.
Exactly. All right, so let's see. The next couple of things, if you want to add anything to it, I believe you've already talked a bit about them. But weapons and projectiles. Actually, no, there is a little bit you can talk about here. Just the whole idea of weapons.
And the idea of weapons is a little bit, I'm tempted to call it unorthodox, because let's say you have a system in a game that consists of weapons and projectiles. The first thing that comes to mind is the weapon is a physical gun, and one of the properties of that weapon would be the things that it fires. So it stands to logic that, yes, I would make projectiles be a property of weapons, where the weapon represents different kinds of, generally visual weapons. Now, for a few reasons, one of which being the fact that you don't physically see the weapons. A weapon is a behind-the-scenes mechanism that causes projectiles to be spawned. I actually decided to change things up a little bit. The way projectiles come into being is actually from what I'm going to call a recursive action system implemented back in Node. Since nodes are hierarchical, they can be parented, I decided to make a system that can pass a delegate on to each of the children that may be parented to any given node so that they can perform that action. And I liked keeping it generic like that because, one, an action could be a weapon firing action. So this action could be the thing that causes projectiles to come out of whatever node it is. But actions could be extended to do pretty much anything you would want. You can use furthered effects. One of the examples I use is I begin with an action that causes a bullet to appear. But then I add another action that causes all enemies on screen to be damaged. So that way, using the same system, I could, if I wanted to, create a firing mode that acted more like a bomb than like a projectile spawning system. And there's further things such as spawning maybe multiple projectiles or really causing anything you want to have happen. The recursive nature implies that if you had, say, a sidearm object that was parented to your ship, you wouldn't have to have a separate weapon system on that sidearm. Because the action of firing a projectile is in fact run recursively, anything parented to you automatically gets that behavior. So it was a very flexible and a very powerful way of approaching that, so that you could use projectiles or anything else that you wanted. Now the question that comes up after all that, implementing that much flexibility, is why would you even need the weapon class anymore? And I used weapon to control the timing behavior of weapon firing. It's inside of the weapon that controls, is this a semi-automatic weapon? Is it a full automatic weapon? Is it a burst fire weapon, a kind of weapon where you would press fire once and actually get a series of projectiles spawned with a delay between each projectile? So the weapons in SpaceFighter are actually a timing system. The projectiles are the things that you see physically on the screen, and delegated functions known as actions are the things that cause projectiles into being. By mixing these three elements, you're given a lot of freedom in how you can string weapons together and how you can create weapons.
Excellent. Okay, I believe that's pretty much everything that we wanted to just give a quick overview of. Again, this is just a temporary video. We will let you guys know when the final introduction to SpaceFighter goes up. But there's a lot of stuff for us to make it through. And I'm, at the moment, planning on doing the overview, the final overview, once we're done with the game itself. So we'll pull this video down and we'll replace it with the final overview. So if you happen to be one of the lucky ones to grab this video, then you get the one where Logan and I just kick back, chill, and talk to you about what's coming up. And if you get the other one, then you'll just never know. But everybody, of course, will have access to the final one once we've uploaded it. So if you have grabbed this video, you'll be more than welcome to grab the other one, the final, when it is up. Now, Logan has spent a lot of time working SpaceFighter up. We've started out way back in the day, because this has obviously been quite a ways away from when the XNA class started, with SpaceFighter being built heavily on just the things that were shown in Volume 1 and 2 for the most part, with very little usage of all of the cool things that have been covered throughout Volume 3. So actually everything was based off of the elementary stuff back in Volume 1 and 2, all of the other game engines that we've created. But Logan has gone back to the drawing board, and we've looked for, everything that we can start throwing into these games to make the 101 Xtreme class just as robust as we possibly can. And I honestly think, for a $99 101 class with 110 plus hours, we've done a really good job of hitting so much in regards to topics, just educational content and all. And with SpaceFighter, we had it working way back in the day and had a demonstration of it. But honestly, I would have felt pretty bad if we would have gone with that particular approach, because now it's very logical, it's very flexible. It can be extended into some really amazing 2D top-down scrolling games if you want.
It's also more efficient, and it's been redesigned to utilize all the stuff that we've learned to be able to leverage everything we've learned up until now.
Exactly. So, I guess what I'm getting at is I hope you guys really enjoy the training videos that will follow this one, and I can't wait to see what sort of space fighters come from our students in the XNA 101 class. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap up this temporary video and get started with the real videos. Thank you guys very much for joining in and listening, and we'll see you around over at 3D Buzz in the classroom.